The letter arrived on a Tuesday, the same day the survey stakes appeared. They were flimsy wooden things with jarring pink plastic ribbons, hammered into the earth just inches from the old stone well house my Eleanor had designed. The letter was the opposite of flimsy. It was printed on paper so thick it felt like it had a trust fund, with an embossed letterhead for the Oak Creek Estates Homeowners Association. It smelled faintly of Augusta Finch's perfume, a chemical sweet assault that always reminded me of an industrial air freshener trying to cover up something rotten. I didn't need to read it to know what it was. A declaration of war. For 40 years, I was a hydrogeologist. I mapped the secret worlds beneath our feet. I understood pressure, flow, and the slow, inexorable power of water moving through stone. I understood that the most formidable forces are the ones you cannot see, the ones that build silently until a critical point is reached. Then, the structure fails, catastrophically. Augusta Finch was about to learn a great deal about structural failure. The letter, signed with a flamboyant, arrogant scrawl, informed me that a beautification project was underway. A new, uniform privacy fence was being installed along the property line of the 5 homes in her exclusive cul-de-sac. My property backed up to hers. The letter stated, not asked, that a section of this fence would be constructed on what she called HOA common area, which, according to the pink stakes, bisected my backyard and ran directly across the access path to my well. My well. Eleanor's well. When we bought this land 40 years ago, it was just a field. We built this house with our own hands, and that well was the first thing we drilled. Eleanor believed water had a spirit. She'd hold the divining rod, a willow branch, and walk the property, her brow furrowed in concentration. When it dipped, she'd laugh, a sound like wind chimes. The water from that well was sweet and cold, drawn from an aquifer so pure it was like drinking liquid crystal. It watered her gardens, the sprawling, chaotic masterpiece of roses and lavender and herbs that was her life's other great project. Eleanor had been gone for 3 years. The garden was my last living connection to her. The well was its heart. Augusta Finch was planning to wall it off. I walked out to her house that afternoon. Her pearl-white Escalade was parked in the driveway, gleaming like a monument to bad taste. Augusta herself was directing a pair of beleaguered-looking workmen, pointing with a long, blood-red acrylic nail. She wore white linen pants, a silk blouse, and sunglasses the size of dinner plates. She looked less like a homeowner and more like a dictator visiting a vanquished province. "Augusta," I said. My voice was calm. In my line of work, panic is a liability. You maintain engineering calm, even when you're staring at a potential dam breach. She turned, the sunglasses dipping slightly. "Frank, darling," she purred, the word darling carrying the same warmth as a foreclosure notice. "Here to admire the progress? It's going to add so much value." "You've made a mistake," I said, keeping my tone level. "Your stakes are on my property." She produced a thin, brittle smile. It didn't touch her eyes, which were cold and hard behind the expensive lenses. "Oh, I don't think so. The HOA board reviewed the plans. It's all perfectly above board. This little patch of grass here is common area. Always has been." "This little patch of grass," I said, gesturing to the well house, "contains my water source. The one that's been registered with the county for 4 decades. The one that predates this entire subdivision." The smile tightened. "An antiquated system, Frank. Honestly, it's an eyesore. We're all on city water now. Why you insist on keeping that shack is beyond me. But don't you worry. The fence will hide it nicely." The workmen had stopped, looking anywhere but at us. They knew a storm front when they saw one. "You cannot block access to my well, Augusta. It's illegal." She took a step closer. The perfume was suffocating. "Listen, honey," she said, her voice dropping the pretense of friendliness. It was now the sharp, condescending tone she used at HOA meetings to shut down dissent. "I am the president of this association. I have consulted our lawyers. The plans are approved. This fence is going up. If you have a problem, you can file a grievance with the board. The board, I might remind you, which I control." She turned her back on me, a clear dismissal. "Carry on, boys," she chirped to the workers. I stood there for a long moment, the scent of her perfume mixing with the smell of freshly turned earth. I felt a familiar sensation building inside me. It wasn't hot, explosive anger. It was something different. It was the feeling I'd get on a project site when I'd see a hairline fracture in a load-bearing column. A quiet, cold, methodical rage. A problem had been identified. A system was under stress. All that remained was to gather the data and engineer the solution. Big mistake, Augusta. Huge. I went back inside, to my office. The room smelled of old paper, pine sap from the drafting table, and the faint metallic tang of my geological tools. It was a sanctuary of logic and order. For 3 years, it had been mostly quiet, a place of memory. Now it was a command center. I didn't start with anger. I started with work. Revenge, I've always thought, is a form of engineering. You have a desired outcome and a set of constraints. The goal is to design a system that achieves the outcome with maximum efficiency and spectacular, undeniable results. Augusta had defined the problem. My job was to design the failure cascade that would solve it, permanently. Phase 1. Data acquisition. I pulled out the original deed to my property, the thick vellum paper cool and solid in my hands. I unrolled the property survey, a document nearly as old as our marriage. The blue ink faded, but the lines still sharp and precise. I laid them out on my drafting table, the same table where Eleanor and I had sketched out the plans for this house. My calloused fingers traced the property line. It was exactly where I remembered it. The well was a full 15 feet inside my boundary. The pink stakes were a lie. This was the first data point. Augusta was either incompetent or she was deliberately encroaching. Knowing her, it was a cocktail of both, garnished with arrogance. Next, I went online. County records, property tax maps, archived satellite imagery. I spent hours cross-referencing, downloading, and printing. I created a digital folder, then a physical one, a 3-inch binder with a simple label, Finch. I found the original subdivision plat map from 1978. It was a beautiful, hand-drawn document, a ghost of a time before CAD software. I saw our plot, marked as a pre-existing parcel, and I saw the lines for the new lots, including the cul-de-sac where Augusta's McMansion now stood. I printed it on the largest paper my plotter could handle and pinned it to the corkboard on my wall. It became my battle map. The next day, the post hole digger arrived. The noise was a low, grinding growl that vibrated through the floorboards. I didn't go out. I didn't confront them. Instead, I set up a camera. A simple game camera, motion-activated, strapped to the old oak tree in my backyard. It would record every movement, every shovelful of my soil they displaced. I also started a logbook, a simple, spiral-bound notebook. In it, I recorded every event, every noise, every perceived slight, with the date and time noted with engineering precision. October 17th, 8:05. Post hole auger begins operation. October 17th, 8:07, first hole dug on my property. Soil displacement noted. October 17th, 10:22. Augusta Finch arrives on site. Observed berating workers. Click, click, click of her acrylic nails audible from my window. Documentation is a weapon, a quiet, patient, devastating weapon. By that evening, a line of ugly metal posts stood sentinel across my yard. They were stark and brutal against the soft greens and golds of Eleanor's garden. It felt like a desecration. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my office, the glow of the monitor illuminating stacks of paper. I was digging deeper, not into the earth, but into the history of this land. I downloaded the complete covenants, conditions, and restrictions for the Oak Creek Estates HOA. All 128 pages of dense, mind-numbing legalese. I brewed a pot of black coffee, the bitter aroma filling the quiet house, and I began to read. I read it like I would a core sample report. I wasn't just looking for words. I was looking for anomalies, for fissures, for the hidden layers that tell the real story. I highlighted every mention of easements, water rights, and common areas. I cross-referenced clauses, made notes in the margins, and built a web of interconnected regulations on a separate sheet of paper. Most of it was boilerplate nonsense. Rules about lawn maintenance, trash can placement, the approved shades of beige for exterior paint. It was a testament to the petty tyrannies of suburban life. But buried deep in an appendix from the late 70s, I found it. The moment of discovery was not a thunderclap. It was a quiet click, the sound of a final puzzle piece sliding into place. It was beautiful. It was a section titled Utility and Water Access Easement. It was one of the original covenants, filed by the developer before a single house was built. The language was archaic, dense, but the meaning was as clear as the water from my well. The developer, in order to get the subdivision approved, had to guarantee a reliable water source. At the time, the city water main was miles away, so he had drilled a series of test wells and discovered the same rich, stable aquifer that fed my own. The entire subdivision was originally designed to run on well water drawn from that aquifer. The covenant established a primary access point for maintenance and monitoring of the aquifer's water table. That access point was my well. The document granted a permanent, irrevocable easement, 10 feet wide, running from the street, along my property line, directly to my wellhead. It was for the benefit of the entire community. It gave the designated water authority, which, by succession, was now the HOA, the right to access my well for inspection, maintenance, and emergency management of the community's primary water resource. I sat back in my chair, the leather groaning in the silence. My heart was beating a slow, heavy rhythm, like a deep earth tremor. Augusta and her predecessors had forgotten. Decades ago, the neighborhood had connected to city water, and this foundational document, this cornerstone of the community's very existence, was left to gather dust in the county archives. They had forgotten that their legal right to exist was tied to the very piece of land Augusta was now trying to wall off. But the covenant said more. It was a two-way street. It didn't just grant the HOA rights, it imposed responsibilities. It stipulated that the property owner, me, had the right, and indeed the obligation, to ensure the easement was kept clear and the underlying infrastructure was protected. It gave me the right to take any and all necessary actions to prevent obstruction or damage to the aquifer access point. Any and all necessary actions. A slow smile spread across my face. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of an engineer who has just found the critical flaw in an opponent's design. the flaw that will lead to total systems failure. Augusta wasn't just building a fence on my property. She was building it on a critical utility easement that she, as HOA president, was legally bound to protect. She was, in essence, suing herself, and she had just handed me the legal authority to tear down not just her fence, but her entire world. The next morning, the fence panels started going up. Tall, white, sterile vinyl. It was like a plastic tombstone being erected in my yard. I watched them from the window, my logbook open, the camera recording. My rage was gone, replaced by a profound and chilling calm. I was no longer a victim. I was a project manager. Phase 2. Systems analysis and design. I spent the next 48 hours in a state of intense, focused activity. I called my old friend, Tom Casey. Tom had been the lead counsel for my firm for 30 years. He was retired now, mostly spending his days fishing, but his mind was still a steel trap. I didn't even say hello. "Tom, I have a hypothetical," I said, and I laid it all out. The well, the fence, the HOA, and the beautiful, forgotten covenant. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, a low whistle. "Frank," he said, his voice laced with a glee he probably hadn't felt since his last multi-million-dollar lawsuit. "That's not a hypothetical, and that's not a smoking gun. That's a tactical nuclear weapon." "I know," I said. "So what's the protocol for detonation?" We talked for 2 hours. He confirmed my reading of the covenant. He told me the exact statutes to cite. He gave me the names of the county departments to contact: Code Enforcement, Water Resource Management, the County Surveyor's Office. He told me to document everything, which I was already doing. "And Frank," he said before he hung up, "when you do this, make it public. Make it a spectacle. Bullies like her only understand one thing: public humiliation." I followed his instructions to the letter. I drafted formal letters, citing the specific clauses of the covenant and the relevant county codes. I sent them via registered mail to Augusta, the entire HOA board, and the HOA's management company. The letters informed them that they were in violation of a recorded easement, that they were illegally obstructing access to a designated primary water resource, and that all construction must cease immediately. I then drove to the county government center, a sprawling beige building that smelled of weak coffee and bureaucracy. I filed official complaints with 3 separate departments. I provided copies of my survey, the original plat map, and the 1978 water covenant. The clerks were, for the most part, bored and indifferent. But in the Water Resource Management Office, a young engineer's eyes lit up when he saw the documents. "I'll be damned," he said, tracing the lines on the old map. "This is the Oak Creek Aquifer. We've been trying to get a new monitoring well approved out here for years, but we couldn't get an easement. According to this, you're sitting on top of the best access point we could ask for." We had a very productive conversation. By the time I got home, the fence was complete. A stark white wall of vinyl, 6 feet high, cutting my yard in 2. It ran right up to the stone wall of the well house, leaving a gap of less than a foot. It was impossible to get a wheelbarrow through, let alone any serious maintenance equipment. It was a monument to Augusta's spite. I took a picture of it. I logged it in my book. That evening, my phone rang. It was Augusta. Her voice was no longer a purr. It was a shrill, angry buzz, like a hornet trapped in a jar. "What is the meaning of these letters, Frank? Are you threatening me?" "I'm not threatening you, Augusta," I said, my voice as calm as a settled reservoir. "I'm informing you. You have illegally constructed a fence on my property, and in doing so, you have violated a foundational covenant of the very HOA you preside over. You have created a serious legal and logistical problem. I am simply outlining the consequences. This is harassment. I'll have my lawyers sue you into the ground, she shrieked. The sound was sharp enough to etch glass. Your lawyers? I said, allowing a hint of amusement into my voice. The same lawyers who apparently failed to do a basic title search for the common areas? The same lawyers who let you build on a recorded utility easement? Please, by all means, put them on the phone. I'd love to have a chat. There was a sputtering sound. Then the line went dead. I knew she wouldn't back down. People like Augusta never do. Their arrogance is a pre-existing condition. She would double down. She would see this as a challenge to her authority, and she would try to crush me with the power she thought she had. That was the critical design flaw in her character. And I was about to apply pressure until it failed. The next step was to escalate. The covenant gave me the right to take any and all necessary actions. I interpreted that clause with the creativity of a seasoned engineer. The fence wasn't just an obstruction. It was a potential structural impediment to emergency access. Its installation, without a proper geological survey, could have destabilized the substrata around the wellhead. This was, of course, a load of nonsense. But it was official-sounding nonsense. It was the kind of language bureaucrats understood. I drafted a new letter. This one was a formal notice of emergency maintenance and inspection. It stated that, due to the recent unpermitted construction adjacent to the Oak Creek Aquifer access point, a full and immediate inspection of the underlying water infrastructure was now required, as per the rights granted in the original covenant. This inspection would necessitate the use of heavy equipment, including a backhoe and a drilling rig for core sampling. And here was the beautiful part. I had spent hours studying the old subdivision utility maps. The main water line that fed Augusta's entire 5-home cul-de-sac, the one from the city, ran through the same easement. It branched off from the main road and passed right by my well on its way to her little enclave of beige palaces. The shut-off valve for that entire branch was located on my property, at the edge of the easement, right where the new fence began. My notice informed the HOA that, for the safety of the work crew and to prevent any potential contamination of the city water supply during the emergency work, the water main servicing lots 1 through 5 of the Oak Creek cul-de-sac would have to be shut down. The shutdown would begin in 48 hours. The duration would be indeterminate, pending the results of the full geological survey. I hand-delivered a copy to every house on her street. I posted one on the community bulletin board, and I sent the original, again by registered mail, to Augusta. The silence for the next 24 hours was profound. It was the quiet of a system under immense, invisible pressure. The quiet before the breach. Then, the calls started. Not from Augusta, but from her neighbors. They were confused, then concerned, then panicked. Mr. Miller, my wife said you're shutting off our water? What is this about an inspection? We have small children. We can't be without water. To each of them, I was polite, calm, and unshakably firm. I explained the situation simply. Unfortunately, the HOA president, Mistress Finch, has built an illegal structure that is endangering the community's primary water asset. I am legally required to perform emergency maintenance. I'm very sorry for the inconvenience, but your complaints should really be directed to her. She caused this problem. I was turning her own people against her. I was isolating her on her own little island of power. The morning of the shutdown, a Thursday, was bright and clear. I was up at dawn, drinking my coffee on the back porch, looking at the offensive white fence. At 7:55 a.m., a big yellow backhoe rumbled down my street and turned into my driveway. I had called in a favor from a contractor I'd worked with for years. He owed me one. Behind it was a flatbed truck carrying a small drilling rig. The sight of heavy machinery in our quiet suburban neighborhood was like a shark appearing in a swimming pool. Windows flew open. People came out onto their lawns, pointing and whispering. At precisely 8 a.m., I walked over to the main valve. It was housed in a simple concrete box set into the lawn. I had the key, a heavy, four-pronged piece of steel. I fitted it onto the valve stem, and with a satisfying deep groan of metal on metal, I began to turn. I closed the valve that supplied water to the 5 most expensive houses in the neighborhood. The reaction was immediate. A door slammed. Augusta Finch came marching across her perfectly manicured lawn, a silk bathrobe flapping behind her like a battle standard. Her face, normally a mask of Botoxed placidity, was a twisted knot of fury. "What do you think you're doing?" she screeched. I straightened up, holding the valve key. "Good morning, Augusta. I'm performing necessary maintenance, as per the notice I sent you." "You can't do this. I'll have you arrested." "For what?" I asked calmly. "Following the legal covenants of our community? Protecting a registered utility easement? I have all the paperwork. Would you like to see it?" The backhoe driver, a large man named Sal, had positioned his machine right in front of the fence. He gave me a slight nod. I nodded back. With a roar of diesel and a hiss of hydraulics, the backhoe's arm rose, the heavy steel bucket glinting in the morning sun. It swung over the fence. Augusta's scream was something to behold. It was a sound of pure, undiluted rage and disbelief, the sound of a tyrant watching her power evaporate in real time. "Stop! That's HOA property!" "No, it's not," I said, my voice cutting through her shrieking. "It's a temporary, illegal structure built on my land, obstructing a legal easement, and I am now removing the obstruction." Sal was an artist with that machine. The bucket came down with surgical precision. It didn't just smash the fence. It hooked underneath the first panel, right next to the metal post set in concrete, and lifted. There was a sickening tearing sound and a groan of stressed metal. The entire 10-foot section, post, concrete footing, and vinyl panel, was ripped from the earth, leaving a gaping, muddy wound in the ground. He swung the arm around and dropped the wreckage onto Augusta's lawn, right on top of her prize-winning petunias. He then proceeded to do the same thing, section by section, down the entire length of the fence. It was a symphony of destruction, a ballet of heavy machinery. Each piece was torn out and deposited in a growing pile of twisted vinyl and concrete on her side of the property line. Her other neighbors were now all outside. They stood in a silent, stunned row. One of them, Mr. Henderson from the corner house, started to clap. Slowly at first, then with more enthusiasm. Soon, a few others joined in. Augusta stood, frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. The entire symbol of her power, the wall she had built to solidify her control, was being dismantled and dumped on her lawn in under 5 minutes. As the last section came down, 2 vehicles pulled up to the curb. One was a county sheriff's car. The other was a white pickup truck with the county code enforcement logo on the side. They had arrived right on schedule. A deputy and a stern-looking woman with a clipboard got out. They walked past a sputtering Augusta and came over to me. "Frank Miller?" the code enforcement officer asked. "Yes, ma'am." "We received your complaint. We also received about a dozen calls this morning about a water shutdown." "Yes," I said. "Emergency maintenance. The situation is now under control. The obstruction has been removed." I pointed with the valve key to the pile of wreckage on Augusta's lawn, The officer looked at the pile, then at Augusta, then back at her clipboard. We have an unpermitted structure, encroachment on a utility easement, and illegal obstruction of a registered water source. That's before we even get to the fraud allegations. Augusta's head snapped around. Fraud? What fraud? This was a part of the plan I had kept to myself. When I was digging through the HOA records, I didn't just look at bylaws, I looked at financials. The invoices for the fence were from a company, Finch Landscaping and Construction. A quick business search revealed the owner was Augusta's brother-in-law. The price she had the HOA pay for that fence was roughly triple the market rate. She hadn't just built a fence, she'd used it to embezzle money. I had passed that little tidbit along to the county prosecutor's office. The deputy stepped forward. "Ma'am, we need to ask you some questions down at the station." The meltdown was spectacular. It was a complete systems failure cascade. The screaming, the crying, the accusations. Her mask of cool superiority didn't just crack, it shattered into a million pieces. It was ugly, and it was public, and it was exactly what she deserved. They led her away. She was still shrieking about her lawyer as they put her in the back of the patrol car. I walked over to Sal, who was idling the backhoe. "Nicely done," I said, handing him a thermos of coffee I'd brought out. He grinned. "Anytime, Frank. Anytime." I turned back to the crowd of neighbors. They were looking at me with a mixture of awe and terror. I was the quiet old man from the house at the end of the street, the widower who kept to himself. They had no idea there was a sleeping giant behind my quiet demeanor. I walked back to the valve and, with another groan of metal, turned their water back on. The whole outage had lasted less than 30 minutes, just long enough to make a point. The epilogue was, in many ways, even more satisfying. Augusta Finch's downfall was total and complete. The illegal fence was just the loose thread that allowed me to unravel her entire corrupt tapestry. The fraud investigation uncovered years of embezzlement, kickbacks, and bid rigging. She had been using the HOA as her personal piggy bank. She faced a host of state and federal charges. Her pearl-white Escalade was repossessed. Her house went into foreclosure to pay the fines and legal fees. She ended up serving 3 years in a federal correctional facility. The HOA was thrown into chaos. The remaining board members, all of whom had been her spineless cronies, resigned in disgrace. A special election was held. I was, somewhat reluctantly, elected the new president. My first act was to hire an independent auditing firm to go through every line of the budget for the last decade. My second was to have the HOA's lawyers sue Augusta in civil court for the money she had stolen. We won. The judgment was for over $200,000. By the time the legal dust settled, the HOA had a significant surplus. There was talk of rebates, of lowering fees. But I had a different idea. I stood before the community at the next annual meeting, held in the local library instead of Augusta's cavernous living room. Augusta Finch's tenure was about control, exclusion, and personal gain, I told them. She used our money to build walls. I propose we use this money, her money, really, to build something that brings us together. I proposed the creation of the Eleanor Miller Memorial Park. There was an unused, overgrown patch of common land at the entrance to the subdivision. We would turn it into a community park, with a playground for the kids, benches, and a garden. And in the center of that garden, we would use the settlement funds to drill a new well, a fountain, as a symbol of the community's shared resources. They voted for it unanimously. But I wasn't done. There was still a sizable amount of money left. With the rest of the funds, I established a non-profit foundation, a legal defense fund for homeowners across the state who were being bullied by corrupt or overreaching HOAs. We called it the Quiet Man's Fund. It was my tribute to every underestimated, overlooked person who just wanted to be left in peace. My life is quiet again now. The park is built. Kids' laughter drifts over from the playground on summer afternoons. The foundation is thriving, run by a board of pro bono lawyers Tom helped me recruit. I resigned as HOA president after one term, passing the torch to a sensible young woman from down the street. My backyard is my own again. The pile of fence wreckage sat on Augusta's lawn for a month, until the bank that seized the property paid to have it hauled away. The scar in the earth where the posts were has healed, covered over by the creeping thyme Eleanor planted years ago. Sometimes, I sit on my back porch in the evenings, a glass of cold well water in my hand. I look at the old stone well house, standing sturdy and untouched. I can almost feel Eleanor's presence there, a quiet satisfaction in the air. The water from the well is still as sweet and pure as ever. It reminds me that some things are worth fighting for. People like Augusta Finch think the world is built on loud threats, thick paper, and plastic fences. They're wrong. The world is built on foundations, on things that are deep and old and true. And if you try to build your flimsy, ugly structures on top of those foundations without understanding them, they will sooner or later bring everything you have crashing down. It's not magic. It's just good engineering.